Fighting is the biggest design failure of Gen 1. In a few previous videos, I mentioned how some types failed at the original design objectives in various ways, but never specified which failed the hardest. Well, it's fighting. This seems strange from a modern perspective because nowadays, fighting is usually regarded as one of the stronger types, with great attack stats, high power moves, great type matchups, and the capability for both speedy and bulky playstyles. Well, it took a long road to get here. Now, it's very tempting to blame Psychic for Fighting's Gen 1 failings, but no. Even if Psychic were balanced, Fighting would still have failed at its job. What was that job, you ask? Killing normal and rock types, of course. Except it couldn't do that properly. Fighting Pokemon function well in the early game thanks to 50 power low kick and their high attack stats working very well for normal moves, but they quickly fall off because they had an utterly abysmal selection of moves for the mid and late game. At first glance, this seems like a good list of moves, but it isn't, because 3 of these are exclusive to Hitmonlee, whereas Double Kick was only learned by the Nidoran line, Jolteon, and also Hitmonlee. The Machop, Mankey, and Poliwrath lines learned effectively no fighting moves after low kick. Their best attack was Submission, which was uniquely rubbish even by Gen 1 standards. Its 80 base power was decent, but 80 accuracy made it unreliable, and the 1/4 recoil damage just wrecks the user's bulk even if it hits. Imagine how much damage you take for using this on a Chansey or Snorlax. Compared to that, High Jump Kick had 85 base power and 90 accuracy, and dealt only 1 point of damage to the user if it misses, making it the best fighting move in the game. But it's exclusive to Hitmonlee. Clearly God has a favorite. So if you chose Hitmonchan from the dojo, you effectively don't have a usable fighting Pokemon unless you had a friend to trade with for Machamp. Either way, it didn't matter who the best Gen 1 fighting Pokemon was, because everyone was competing for the title of King of Mid here. Rock, for all its faults, still at least did the bare minimum job of tanking normal damage, even if it failed everywhere else. Fighting couldn't even manage that. Fighting's mediocre moves and unremarkable defense meant it couldn't even do its basic job of breaking normal and rock Pokemon. The reason why Fighting's move options were so bad is likely because it was intended to kill normal types. Remember that Gen 1 structured a huge amount of their design and balancing around the normal type. It represented the largest percentage of the Pokemon roster and comprised the largest number of moves in the game. So anything which was directly advantaged over normal was a pretty big deal. In addition to that, Rock was designed to be the physical tank of the type chart due to high defense stats and resistance to normal. Fighting having advantage over both normal and rock meant it risked being overly dominant, so its best move was given numerous drawbacks to compensate for it dealing 2 times damage against a huge portion of the Pokemon roster. Additionally, since fighting Pokemon were all about having high attack stats, they'd still be able to run normal moves and other coverage to deal good damage to the poison, flying, and psychic types which resisted their fighting moves. Sounds decent in theory. This trail of logic led the developers into genuinely believing that fighting was gonna be one of the best types in the game, to the point that they made it into one of the Elite Four, which reflected what Game Freak believed to be the most powerful types at the time. Not only that, but they were so concerned about fighting, they outright nerfed Bruno to make him easier. Despite Gen 1 having 5 fighting Pokemon, enough for a full team, they went and gave him 2 Onix instead. They were that scared, it's genuinely funny. Bear in mind, this was all without taking into consideration Psychic being accidentally overpowered. Psychic was always intended to be a counter to fighting. The game even advertises it as such via the Saffron Gym and Fighting Dojo. However, the intended interaction was for Psychic to keep a powerful type in check. It certainly wasn't to pull a "this world isn't yours to conquer" and destroy everything the way it did. On one final note, it's worth pointing out that counter only works against normal and other fighting type moves, including your own counter, and nothing else. Just another indication of how much Gen 1's design was built up around normal. For fighting though, this was just adding insult to injury. At this point, you can't help but cry, "Stop, they're already dead." The fun thing about fighting is how quickly you can see the developers identify and fix their mistakes. Gen 2 immediately addressed the type's move options, for the Machop line at least. Vital Throw was given exclusively to it, providing it with a good mid-game damage option. Some Pokemon also received Cross Chop as a late-game option, which matched Earthquake's 100 base power, albeit with less accuracy. Not the best, but considering the alternative was submission, beggars can't be choosers. Reversal and dynamic punch were added as different styles of high risk, high reward. The former involved you risking your HP, and the latter turned the battle into a gambling simulator. Curse wasn't a fighting move, but heavily benefited many fighting Pokemon by giving them a way to boost their attack stat, helping secure KOs. And in the future, Mach Punch would go on to become one of the most useful fighting moves. But for now, it was exclusive to the Hitmon line. Hitmonlee continues to be God's favorite. Speaking of which, Hitmontop and Heracross were the only new fighting Pokemon added, but they certainly proved why quality matters over quantity, with Heracross even being the first real bug-type attacker. The addition of the Dark and Steel types also gave fighting additional targets to hit, while also limiting Psychic's universality. At least theoretically, the rarity of both types made this largely irrelevant for the average Johto experience. Psychic still handily countered it, but fighting now had some genuine power instead of being the glorified anchor arms it used to be. The interaction between them was now much closer to the original design intent. In fact, Game Freak were so confident in fighting, they not only gave Bruno a second chance, they even promoted him from the second Elite Four to third. This is how you can tell this is a video game, because only in fiction can that kind of job security exist. He still keeps Onyx, but at least this time he only has one, and he can now present some semblance of difficulty. As a matter of fact, he's arguably got the best team and movesets among the Johto Elite Four, certainly better than whatever Karen is doing at least. Generation 3 was when fighting went from decent to good. Hoenn introduced many Dark and Steel Pokemon, meaning fighting's advantages were now no longer theoretical, and many situations now exist within the game for fighting Pokemon to shine, both new and old. Medicham was one of the biggest glass cannons in the game. Blaziken was a speedy and effective mix attacker, Breloom was a Spore user that was allowed to be good, and Hariyama used the type defensively. The addition of abilities also disproportionately benefited the type by giving them another way to boost their offense even further. Guts turned Burn from a potential soft check into an advantage, neutering the attack penalty and giving them a buff instead. This allowed Machamp, Heracross and Hariyama to become dangerous offensive threats if handled carelessly. Many new tools were also added. Brick Break, Revenge and Scaraboccut finally rectified the lack of mid and late game options, ensuring all fighting Pokemon could now be useful at all stages of the game. Bulk Up was also an improved and more accessible version of Curse, but the real star was Focus Punch. 150 base power was huge back during Generation 3, and fighting's offensive advantages made it very useful for breaking through many passive opponents. The catch was that it was very prediction dependent, so it required a good amount of game knowledge to effectively use, but it being a TM with wide distribution meant that it was everywhere. Almost everything learned the move, so a competitive player could always get randomly jump scared by it out of nowhere. Perhaps this was an attempt to break through the passive playstyles which were more popular back in Gen 2. Either way, for those experimenting with competitive play at this early stage, there is absolutely no question that Focus Punch was the main character of this anime. Generation 4 took fighting from good to great, though not through the physical special split like how Dark did. Like Ground, every fighting type was a physical attacker, so the addition of special fighting moves mattered very little for them. The ones that did benefit from them were, ironically, Psychic Pokemon. Focus Miss is the best worst move in Pokemon. It's the stuff of absolute comedy. Despite the 120 base power, nobody used it because they actually wanted to. Its 70% accuracy made it notoriously unreliable, but since it's the only special fighting move with wide distribution, many Psychic Pokemon were forced to run it as coverage to get past the Dark and Steel types which would otherwise easily wall them. So you toss a Steel type in to stop a Psychic sweep and watch people get angry at RNG, it's great. The real improvement for fighting Pokemon was close combat. Sure, other great options were introduced. Hammer Arm was made for slow, bulky attackers, Superpower was given a wider distribution, and High Jump Kick was buffed, but all of these were pretty much afterthoughts compared to close combat. This move redefined the standard for power in the game as a whole, and catapulted fighting into the premier offensive type that it is today. Its 120 base power allowed for crazy damage output, its perfect accuracy made it consistent, and since its downside only dropped defenses, it could be used to maintain a sweep. Close combat was the definition of all offense, no defense, and every speedy attacker benefited greatly from having it, even the birds. If you were a fighting type Pokemon and didn't have this move, your career at the time was shaky at best, as Blaziken could attest to. Gen 5 was the tipping point from great to overpowered. It added very few new moves, but a lot of new Pokemon. They didn't just add the first fighting type legendary, they added 4 of them. 4.5 depending on how you count Meloetta. On top of that, Unova also had 6 new fighting Pokemon lines. Emboar, Conkeldurr, Sawk, Drow, Scrafty, and Mienshao. More than enough for an entire Elite Four team. No Onyx required. Marshall showed Bruno what fighting was really capable of, and ended up being arguably the most difficult of the 4 despite having the most one-dimensional team of pure physical attackers with no secondary types. On top of this, High Jump Kick was also buffed to a ridiculous 130 power, making it a viable alternative for those who didn't get close combat. Drain Punch also got buffed to 75 power, giving bulky fighting types reliable sustain and made bulk up sets more viable. This was all simply overkill. It's pretty easy to see why Black and White were considered the peak of fighting's dominance. Perhaps the best metaphor for all of this was Blaziken making history as the first star to get banned to Ubers. This was the monster Game Freak initially feared back in Gen 1. Fortunately, a balanced patch soon arrived. Fairy was introduced with a full offensive and defensive advantage over fighting, effectively putting brakes on fighting's sweep. The type also ceased to receive noteworthy new moves. For the next few generations, the only new fighting moves were either exclusives like Surfetch's Meteor Assault, utility options like Power Up Punch and Coaching, or side grades to existing moves like Axe Kick. The most impactful new fighting move wasn't even used by fighting Pokemon. Body Press is the first move in Pokemon to use alternative stat damage calculation, changing the way many defensive Pokemon played. But despite it being a fighting move, very few fighting Pokemon had higher defense than attack, so its 80 base power never outperformed Hammer Arm or Close Combat. The only exception was Zamazenta, who didn't even get Body Press in its debut. The move ended up being primarily used by Steel and Rock types instead. This was likely a precautionary measure. Alternative stat scaling can have substantial impact on a game's balance, so they intentionally chose fighting since its focus on attack made it the type least likely to benefit from it. If it was a Steel or Rock move, then Body Press users would have both ridiculous bulk and outstanding damage thanks to Stab. So as the first of its kind, they were right to be very careful with it. That said, they've now gotten a better understanding of where this move's balance lies, and have relaxed on it as a result. They've given it to Zamazenta and later Mega Chestnut because holy shit, that is 172 defense. But that's a minority. The majority of fighting Pokemon have just been reusing all the same tools since Gen 4 and 5. That's it, there's a reason why that's the case. Fighting has now reached the same point where Ground is design-wise. Its evolution is complete. It's exactly where it needs to be within the scope of the overall metagame. The only thing left for Fighting to do from this point onwards is to just carry on. Make new Pokemon, create new characters, and close more combats. Thus concludes the story of the worst type in Gen 1. Started from the bottom and now it's here. A real zero to hero story. Just goes to show how much work was needed to slowly adjust balance in a metagame like this. Now, to wrap up, tell me my dear viewer, what is your favorite fighting Pokemon? Are you a fan of the OG Machamp? Were you taken in by Lucario's broad appeal? Or maybe you just like using fire starters? For me, I'm a Crabominable fan. You can imagine how pleased I was to see that Mega in ZA. Before I leave you, give a round of applause to my editor, Drix. He really went and outdid himself this time. Now go watch another video. I'll see you in the next one.